The Unbelievable Story of Pence and Michelle. CSS Crime Story Series. Pence always wanted a big family, so big that he was willing to do whatever it took. Luckily for him, his wife, Michelle, shared the same dream. The two of them wasted no time, and soon, they welcomed their first child. Then came another, and another. By the year 2000, they had 4 children. But 4 wasn't enough for them. They wanted more. So, they continued expanding their family, welcoming one child after another. By 2017, they had a total of 10 children. Unfortunately, tragedy struck when one of their babies died from sudden infant death syndrome. Devastated but determined, they had another child, bringing their count back to 10. Their home was always full of life, love, and strict religious discipline. They homeschooled their kids, made them study the Bible, and kept their house spotless, mostly by having their children do the cleaning. They lived in a 1,900 square foot house, which was a tight fit for such a large family, but they managed. CSS Crime Story Series. The unexpected addition of 5 more kids. One day, during a family road trip in their RV, Michelle was browsing a parenting message board for homeschooling families. That's when she stumbled upon a post from a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Cordero. They were struggling with marital issues and were looking for someone to temporarily take care of their 6 children. CSS Crime Story Series. Michelle didn't hesitate. Despite already having 10 kids, she eagerly volunteered to take in 5 of the 6 children, leaving behind only the eldest, who had special needs. The Pence family then drove all the way to Massachusetts to meet the Corderos and bring the 5 children back with them to Washington. Now, with 15 children in their household, life became even more chaotic. Yet, the Cordero kids seemed happy, and the arrangement continued. The Corderos still wanted to stay in contact with their children, and the Pences agreed to allow occasional visits. A growing rift between families. A year passed, and things seemed stable, until they weren't. With 15 kids in a cramped house, the Pences realized they needed a bigger place. So, they packed up and moved to Texas. Around this time, they decided to formally adopt the 5 Cordero children. A family court approved the adoption, officially making them part of the Pence family. Meanwhile, back in Massachusetts, the Corderos made a surprising decision: they had another baby. This confused everyone. They had just given away 5 of their children, yet they were expanding their family again. But it didn't stop there. A little while later, they had yet another baby. Their actions baffled the Pences, who started feeling uneasy about the entire situation. To make things even more complicated, the Corderos missed their children so much that they relocated to Texas, just to be closer to them. This only deepened the tension between the two families. The Pences didn't approve of how the Corderos had given away 5 kids but continued having more. Eventually, the tension turned into resentment. Wanting to cut ties completely, the Pences secretly moved once again, this time to Utah, without telling the Corderos their whereabouts. Pence's desperate and dangerous plan. By 2020, the Pences had their 16th child, bringing their household count to 20, including Pence's elderly parents. Though their new home was larger, it still had only 7 bedrooms, meaning 20 people were crammed into limited space. Meanwhile, the Corderos, still bitter about losing contact with their children, started filing welfare complaints against the Pences, hoping to cause trouble for them. This constant conflict began taking a toll on Pence. He grew increasingly frustrated, and at some point, he snapped. He convinced himself that the 5 Cordero children they had adopted would be better off if their biological parents were completely out of the picture, permanently. Determined to make that happen, he turned to the dark web in search of a hitman. After weeks of searching, he found a website that claimed to offer murder-for-hire services. He submitted a request, asking for Mr. and Mrs. Cordero to be eliminated in what would look like a burglary gone wrong. He even attached their address, photos, and made a payment of $16,000 in Bitcoin. But right after submitting the order, panic set in. Realizing the gravity of what he had just done, he immediately canceled the request. However, the very next day, he changed his mind again and resubmitted it. Even more absurdly, he asked the website if he could get a discount since both targets lived in the same house, as if he were bargaining for a buy one get one free deal on murder. The shocking twist: Pence gets scammed. Pence waited. Days passed. Nothing happened. Why? Because the so-called hitman website wasn't run by hitmen at all. It was actually a scam site operated by fraudsters in Romania. They happily took his Bitcoin payment and vanished without a trace. But things were about to get even worse for Pence. A British hacker had been secretly infiltrating the fake hitman site and feeding all the data to both TV producers who were making a true crime show and law enforcement. The FBI got hold of Pence's request, traced it back to him, and immediately launched an investigation. Before he knew it, the authorities had enough evidence to arrest him. The FBI swooped in, and Pence was taken into custody. Here's his mugshot. The aftermath: a broken family. Pence eventually took a plea deal and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Meanwhile, Michelle was left alone to take care of their 16 children, struggling to survive on charity and donations. The once happy, ultra-religious family was now shattered, all because of a desperate man who made one terrible decision.